So we drive over to this neighborhood, we all park, and out comes a huge, guy must have been 6'7", 340 with a baseball bat, no shirt on, tatted up everywhere. And it turns out he was from a larger, well-known motorcycle club I won't name, and felt threatened by us. And so it was this interesting moment. It was like, he's like, what do you think you're doing? And basically, I'm going to take you out. And I had to, on the outside, you have to show confidence. The inside, I'm just praying desperately.
And we're back. The Christ and Coffee podcast has returned to unite Christians one conversation at a time. And today we have lead pastor Jared Ossalear joining the program to share his journey into full-time ministry. Pastor Jared, when he was 8 years old, received a prayer from Lonnie Frisbee. Yeah, the guy from the Jesus Revolution. He prayed over him when he was 8 and said, "This kid is a pastor." We're going to hear how Pastor Jared processed that call and the different careers he's had along the way to get to where he's at as a church planter and lead pastor. Pastor Jared had the different uniforms of a Navy officer, of a policeman, and even was in a biker group. Pastor Jared has so many interesting stories to share and nuggets of wisdom to share along the way. But before we jump into today's conversation, the Christ and Coffee podcast is having its first ever event. This Saturday, May 4th at 7 p.m., Church for the Nations will be hosting, in collaborations with Christ and Coffee, a comedy event. Rosanna Tovmasian, you could listen to her episode a couple episodes back, is going to be sharing her comedic talents with us for a time of laughter, food, and fellowship. It's a great opportunity to invite a friend. It's going to be clean comedy, and it's going to be a great time. If you'd like to purchase tickets, you could visit churchforthenations.org and see the link in the event page. With that said, please grab a cup of coffee and enjoy today's conversation. Hey, Pastor Jared. Welcome to the Christ and Coffee podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
First of all, I want to thank you publicly for welcoming us to your church. You're pastor of Story City. We rent from you guys, and you guys have been nothing but great to us, and super grateful for your spirit of hospitality and just seeing us as partners in ministry. So first and foremost, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we're having this conversation.
Yeah, finally, I'm glad we get to do it. We have a deep belief that we should share everything we have. We serve an incredibly generous God, so why would we not be generous? So for me, it's such a blessing that we get to see this space used more than just what we're doing. So love it.
Thank you. So first question is very important and serious.
Yeah.
How do you drink your coffee?
Yeah. Not Keurig.
Okay.
No. Black is my favorite. I would say currently on Americano kick.
Nice.
Yeah, but it also depends on where I'm at, right? So
Yeah.
if I'm overseas, just straight espresso,
Yep.
no sugar. I don't know why, it's just different there. An espresso in Italy is totally different than an espresso in Burbank. So
Yeah. Have you been to Italy a lot or?
not a lot, just once. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing.
But yeah, and wherever I've gone, coffee, I was in the Navy before. And so coffee is an important thing. And the chiefs will tell you there's two things you always do. You make coffee black with some salt.
Salt.
Yep. You add salt to the grounds.
What
And
does the salt do?
I think it takes some bitterness out because usually you're buying cheaper coffee.
Yeah.
Navy doesn't buy like expensive stuff. So that usually it's over roasted or something
Yeah.
else. So a little salt takes the bitterness out. And then you rinse your cup, but you never wash your cup. And so a Navy Chiefs cup will have years and years and years of that beautiful brown. It's like the crema on the sides.
That's awesome.
For coffee. Yeah. So I never wash my coffee. I rinse it, never wash it. Everybody in my family knows, just don't use dad's mug.
That's
So,
great. That's great. Yeah. I'm glad you drink black coffee. That's the way I drink it. And I feel like whenever people ask me how do you drink your coffee, that's the only right answer.
yeah, I think so.
But it does take a little bit of a learning curve to cultivate the palate.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be fair though. If I'm at Denny's, I'm probably not drinking it black.
Right. The quality matters.
It does. Yeah. If it's going to taste like, and I'm not talking classic American diner, I'm talking about Folgers or something,
Yeah.
then I'm going to throw something in there.
Got it. That's good. That's great. So tell me about your upbringing. What was your spiritual background? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Santa Cruz, California. I come from the Jesus movement.
Okay.
So my stepdad, who later adopted me, grew up Catholic. He was in training to be a Jesuit priest. In the Jesus movement, somebody invited them to a Protestant church, and he said he had never experienced worship that way, and he just felt like for the first time he saw Jesus as alive. He ended up working at that school that was tied to the church as their principal. And my mom, who was single momming it at the time with me, happened to be a teacher there. And so they ended up getting married. And like I said, my stepdad adopted me. That church was pastored by two men, a guy named Frank O'Neill and a guy named Lonnie Frisbee.
I've heard of the latter. Yeah.
Yep. Lonnie was of the Jesus Revolution movie fame, though that movie didn't quite do justice to Lonnie. But yeah, so I grew up as long as I can remember loving Jesus, and definitely coming from I don't know if I want to say unique, but an interesting spiritual background.
Yeah, absolutely. What you said, you didn't think that Lonnie Frisbee was represented well. What do you think was a little off from your interactions with him and from what the movie's portrayal?
I don't know that it was off. It's just it's such a nuanced character to describe, right? Like, so Lonnie, the movie that just came out, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, that's an autobiography. It wasn't necessarily, it's one person's perspective from the movement, which is fair. And that's Greg Laurie. And I love that. I think it's great for Greg. The problem is that in Chuck's ministry, I think the really hard part was that none of that would have happened if Lonnie wasn't already doing some incredible stuff that's there. And that was difficult because it didn't get, I don't know if it was as clear how much ministry was already happening and they needed a place to land that was structured and safe. And that's what Chuck really provided. The other part is Lonnie really struggled in the 70s, the whole free love movement. Lonnie was bisexual. And that wasn't a real popular topic, still isn't.
Right.
And so Lonnie ended up dying of AIDS. The movie sort of portrayed it as like it was his arrogance. And certainly there was that from everything I understood. I was younger.
Yeah.
But there was also this whole other thing of how was God using a guy that so struggles with sin, and the outcomes and all that looked. And so my interactions with Lonnie came in the movie after he left for Florida to get his marriage right and came back. So I also got a different view of Lonnie because I got him later in life. So, but he did end up dying of AIDS, and there was a lot of people that really struggled with how could God use somebody so flawed and broken.
Right. And if you read the Bible, it seems like that's everyone.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
So amazing. So you grew up in a Christian home,
mm-hmm.
And then did you just become a pastor, or what happened?
Yeah. So my calling to ministry was about 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
And it was Lonnie Frisbee was praying for all the kids in the front of the church during one service. And I was the last kid in line. He got to me and he stopped and he just had this weird look on his face, as best as I can remember at 8 years old, and said, this kid's a pastor. And it was the only kid that he said that to. There's probably 30 kids up front. And then he prayed over me, and there was a moment where the best that I can explain, it was like he wasn't there. It was just me and Jesus, and it was 100% clear that God was speaking to me in that moment through him. And so I didn't know what that looked like. I just knew that's what God had set me apart for. Yeah.
Amazing. So that's quite a burden to receive as an 8-year-old too, as cool as the experience was, but then the reality of it. Did you start reading the Bible? Did you follow a pastor around after that moment? Like, how does an 8-year-old process their call?
That is a deep question, Pastor. I love that.
You have all the time in the world.
I know, right? I mean, not well.
Yeah.
I think, so I am, I'm a kid who's always found, I think early on, I found a lot of confidence in just the relationship I have with Jesus. It was really clear to me. And so there was a sense of, some of it was having to grow up also as a, single mom. There's things that are just different. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up a little bit maybe earlier than some of my friends. And so there was a sense of confidence I think I had that could also be read as arrogance. I don't think that's the intention that was behind it, but most kids, I was hanging out with a lot more adults at 8 than most kids my age were. I didn't have some of the same stuff because there wasn't a lot of kids my age around. And so yeah, I think I was confident in that calling to the point where it probably led to some areas where I was just, cocky about it. I think I just assumed that would all be easy and fall into place. And over the years, I discovered that was definitely not the case. One of the interesting things for me is the route that took. So, I was like, all right, as I got through, high school and went through all kinds of different things, setbacks, I would say, I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to Bible college. And so 2 weeks from Bible college, paid for our first semester, got everything. My roommate was picked, all that stuff was done. And I felt like the Lord clearly told me, you're going in the Navy instead.
Wow.
You're not going to Bible college. And I was like, makes no sense. I ended up doing 8 years in the Navy as a chaplain's assistant. It was one of the most incredibly formative times for me.
Yeah.
I got to sit at the feet of just about every type of Protestant denomination, secular and ordered Catholic priests, a rabbi, and just for 8 years, ask questions, theological, like, tell me why you believe this. Well, Chaplain so-and-so said this. Why, tell me, and just wrestling with those deep issues from so many different perspectives was a lot of fun. And just when my Navy career was taking off and things looked like it was going to be an excellent path towards chaplaincy myself, God's like, all right, get out and pastor. And I was like, that was a waste. I could have done that 8 years ago.
Yeah.
But for me, that was exactly what was necessary.
Great. So did you jump into pastoral ministry after the 8 years of the Navy, or?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
I got asked to come on staff at a church in Hawaii. And, it was like, as you know how it goes, have like 6 different hats.
Yeah.
So I was an associate pastor. I think I was in charge of, it was near a military base. So I was in charge of, and I just got out of the military. It was in charge of being pastor of the military. It was pastor for young married couples. I was pastor over all of our sound and audio production stuff. We built a sound studio. I ran that. I ran everything outdoors for the services. We had 7 services on a weekend. Ran everything outdoors. And then ushers, greeters, and sound and production team inside on Sunday mornings. So a couple responsibilities.
Just a couple. Yeah.
fun.
That's what usually the assistant pastor or
The young kid. Yeah, that's what he gets. Yeah.
They it's an internship, right? That's amazing. So, but then you got to use your Navy background to actually minister to people, like, because most people don't understand that world as much as
Yeah.
it's a whole another world. But were you grateful for that season? Looking back, what do you think why do you think God brought you through that route? Looking back,
Yeah.
how has it helped you now as a pastor? That whole system.
So from a 30,000 foot level, I'll answer the first part of that question with God has never, every time something has changed in my life where I thought, this is my dream, this is what God has for me, and it's been taken away from me, He's never failed to replace that with something that's better for me and more me than I thought it was. So over the years, as my career has changed, God's not only applied what I've learned from the last, direction I was heading, He's never failed to use that for my best benefit or for His kingdom, even though sometimes it's been very, very painful. Certainly I thought, 8 years, I've got a lot invested here. I might as well just, once you hit the kind of deal is once you hit over 8, the next contract is going to be a 4-year contract. So after that, you're over 10 years, you might as well stay the 20 because it doesn't make sense. So that was the spot to get out if I was going to do it. But 100%, I've learned, at 26 years old, I had a $250,000 budget, 5 building complexes, and 15 staff members reporting to me. Who gives that to a 26-year-old? I made so many mistakes, and they allowed me to make mistakes.
Yeah.
I reflected, obviously, in in your evals and stuff, but they really allowed me to grow and to learn to lead and to have to understand how to operate inside systems and structures that I wouldn't naturally have had. So I'm deeply grateful for it. I find that kind of thing really helpful for me, even now as you're running a nonprofit as a pastor. There's a lot of stuff there that I'm really grateful I learned.
Yeah. Amazing. And did you, I remember you telling me that you were a police officer at one point, in a band at one point, in a biker group at one point.
Yeah.
Where do those pieces fit into the story? Because it's every time I talk to you, like you have this other job, and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah. Well, let's just say, so this is the last 3 years is the first time in my life I haven't had more than one job.
Okay, so it's
one big thing. It's all overlapping.
Got it.
Yeah. So I've just one of those guys that really enjoys doing a lot of different things at the same time. So while I was in the military, I was often serving in capacities at my church. When I got out of the Navy, while I was in the Navy, I had some bands that I was involved in, nothing crazy. When I got out, several of the people that worked at the church there in Hawaii, they had been involved in a band that had done a bunch of national tours and was really great. And one of their members was out doing some post-grad work. And so we formed a band and had a great time for those years. And so I got to play in some cool places and do some really neat things. And then we knew that we were going to church plant. That was always the plan for us. And so we left Hawaii to go to San Diego to church plant. And we had, some money saved for the family, but I knew that I was going to be bivocational. It just was important, both for building relationship in the community and for supporting my family. And so I was like, I need a job where I can work nights and then I could church plant during the day, because that's genius. Sleep is overrated.
Yeah, sleep is
And something that pays well, but that has medical benefits. And a lot of my military friends were going the police route. I was a kid that was getting busted all the time as a kid. So I never thought ever I'd be a police officer.
Yeah.
But, sometimes if you can't beat them, join them. And so I did, and church planted in Mission Beach, Pacific Beach, in San Diego. And at the same time, became a police officer. About a year and a half in, the church, I just wasn't able to manage a full career and a full career. And at the time, I really thought I was a huge failure too. I had this idea of what success looked like, that year and a half in, I should be 100 people, 150 people, and all of these things, and not realizing how much California requires a missionary mindset. It's a much slower pace that has to be worked in, and you have to look at it like a missionary. So I had built a core team of maybe 25 people, all de-churched or non-churched people, in a year and a half. And now I'd be like, man, that's amazing. I want to back that church planter. But at the time, I really believed I was a huge failure. And so we quit, shut it down, and focused on the police, which was, God still used that.
Yeah.
And became a chaplain with them and a chaplain with another police department all at the same time. So I'm still active duty police officer and acting as a chaplain and a chaplain for another agency. And then Valentine's night 2009, Trainee and I were driving in front of the convention center in San Diego, and I pulled over a drunk driver and promptly got hit from behind by another drunk driver.
Wow.
And so I tore my shoulder up, had 4 surgeries, and ultimately they were like, you can't do this job anymore. So I got to, after 10 years, got to retire from that. That led me to a place where I wasn't hanging around cops anymore. But I was really familiar and comfortable in the streets.
Yeah.
Just kind of how I grew up, and then being on the streets as a cop. And I kept running into all these guys who were bikers who really had the Christians that were coming to them in those days were really either formal, or they just couldn't hang in that world. They just didn't speak the language. They couldn't understand it. They were threatened by it or scared of it, and no judgment against them. It's a really hard world to walk into.
Yeah.
But unless you've seen the things that a lot of those guys have seen, it's just hard to relate. And so I just felt like I had been riding motorcycles my entire life. I felt like God say, start loving these dudes. And I did. And it turned into a whole ministry and 10 years of riding with motorcycle clubs and starting a club. And God did mind-blowing things. And then I was also became a full-time pastor again during that time. So yeah, a bunch of bivocational things in there.
But it seems like that, I think there's 2 amazing themes here. One is the fact that you're a person of uniform, right? Whether it's a police officer, the military, or the collar.
Yeah, sure.
What are your thoughts on people in uniform in general? Because it's interesting that I was at Barnes and Nobles and I was like just picking up random books. I think it was Deion Sanders' book, and he has like this whole section on dressing good, and and he has like a little paragraph about like being proud of your uniform. If you're a police officer, be proud of it. If you're a cop, if you're in the army, be proud of it. And
Yeah.
I was thinking the collar too, because I remember, because I used to wear the collar a lot more often too, and you get the looks, you get the identity. So what are your thoughts on just uniforms in general?
Man, we could probably spend a whole other podcast on just that, right? So I am a person who has experienced sexual assault.
Okay.
And I think for me, what that's led to is some real identity issues.
Okay.
So I would say there's two sides to it. One side is probably an unhealthy cry for structure and for things to be like, I know what is coming. I know what's consistent because I'm in uniform and I know the rules. There's probably a piece of that. It's become less and less important as I've become more and more mature as a Christian, and as I've walked more years away from those things. But that's gotta be a piece of it for me, I'm sure. The other part is there's a piece of me that loves going where others can't, or others won't, or don't know how. And I think a lot of those places require uniforms, right? Like, how do you get into the streets? Well, there's only really two ways.
Yeah.
I've done kind of both sides of it. So for me, I love, I don't need to make a name for myself, but I do need to make a path for other people to come to these places. And what I found, like with Christians in the biker world, is so many Christians were against what I was doing.
Yeah.
And they're like, tell me why you would even spend time there. I was like, first, Jesus would, come on. But second, I was like, but who else is going to go? Who else is going to go? And I would describe scenarios that would happen, right? Like this one time I had this guy come to me. He's like, hey, he knew our biker club and he knows that we're Christians. And he's like, hey, my kid ran away. He's hanging out with this family. I think they're really bad news. I want him back, but can I at least drop off, clothing and toothbrush to him and like check on him? But would you guys go there with me? Because I can't go there myself. And we're like, yeah, fine. But you have to stay, like, you've caused a problem. There's a reason he ran away. We'll talk to him, but you have to stay in the background. But yes, we'll do it. So we drive over to this neighborhood. We all park, and out comes a huge, guy must have been 6'7", 340 with a baseball bat, no shirt on, tatted up everywhere. And it turns out he was from a larger, well-known motorcycle club I won't name, and felt threatened by us. And so it was this interesting moment. It was like, he's like, what do you think you're doing? And basically, I'm going to take you out. And I had to, on the outside, you have to show confidence. On the inside, I'm just praying desperately. But the outside, I was like, look, we can go, but I'm only here for this kid. This is what he's like, is this kid even in my house? And his son was like, yeah, he's, I let him in here. And he's like, so we had this whole negotiation moment where little me is looking up at this huge dude who's about to hit me with a baseball bat and like talking my way through that stuff. And it ended up where we were able to work the whole deal out, where that guy ended up feeling respected enough. The kid ended up coming home. The dad got his stuff done, and only God worked that situation out. Right. But that's not one that everybody's built for. I wasn't sure I was built for it until we were done with it. But those are moments that, like, again, who else is going to go? So, yeah. So to answer your question about the uniform stuff, I think part of it is just being able to go where some other people can't. I love that.
So the uniform gives access.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, like if you wear a collar, it's like you have access to officiate this wedding or this funeral. If you have these colors, you could communicate in those streets,
or even to conversations people wouldn't normally have.
Yeah.
Like not everybody's comfortable with the collar, but I was in a bar not too long ago. I was working on my sermon because I like to be in the community when I write my sermons. And this dude walked up. He's like, "Is that real?" And we're in LA, so you don't know if somebody's coming off set or whatever, right? And I was like, "Yeah, it's real." And he's like, "Can I have a hug?" And he started bawling.
Wow.
And he's like, "My life is a mess. My wife died. My kids are out of control." And he's just like, he didn't even know who to talk to. He'd never met a Christian, according to him, that he knew. He just didn't know. And so, yes, that collar, without him knowing anything else about me, because frankly, with my tattoos and stuff, there's a lot of people that might think I'm unapproachable,
right.
Just naturally. But that collar made me approachable. So in that sense, it gave me access to a spiritual conversation that I wouldn't have been able to have without it.
Amazing. So also connected to these uniforms are communities.
Mm.
And it seems like even though you never were a pastor, like you were always a pastor in these communities, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the biker world, my name was Shepherd. They
Okay.
called me Shep because that's how everybody saw me. So on my motorcycle cut, I got a priest collar sewn on my cut. And so every single, guy that I ran into in San Diego, all those guys knew me as Shep, the pastor who rides with us. Like, it was cool. I got to officiate a couple biker weddings. I got to do some stuff that deal with some crazy things because that's 100% how they saw me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the calling versus the title? Because I think some people, like especially in your situation where you have this sense that I'm going to be a pastor at 8. I had my calling when I was 19 and it didn't become official until like 26.
Mm-hmm.
And that felt like a long time. But as I was trying to get to the official credentials of it, I was still operating in that.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on maybe like someone who's listening right now who maybe feels like they're called to ministry, but they're not in the official capacity? Any advice you would give them? Because I feel like there's a lot of people thinking they can't do ministry because they don't have the official title, even though they have the call on them.
Yeah. So, man, that's a loaded question. There's a couple things in here. I'll try to be brief about this. Number one, every apprentice of Jesus is called to operate pastorally in some way.
Yeah.
Every one of us is. That's a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, like, do you need a title? Absolutely not. What you need to do is make sure that you're a part of a local congregation and you're working towards the expression of that congregation, their mission, right? The reason I believe God allows a lot of different churches is because there's a lot of different ways to accomplish his mission. And each church, I believe, God resources for that season so that the people who are there have the gifting, talents, and abilities to carry out the mission or get them to the mission that church needs. And I think those seasons are really important, right? We as pastors really struggle with this. These are my people,
right?
And we sort of hoard, and we don't teach people it's okay to leave. If it wasn't okay to leave, we would never have left our first pastorates. We would still be in those first places, right, maybe even where we grew up. But God moves us in seasons. And if we did a better job of teaching our people how to leave, they wouldn't create scenarios where they create drama so that they can feel good about leaving. So in one sense, it's important that every person understands where you're at spiritually at this point in your life, figure out what God has called you to, what that looks like, and then join a local congregation and go all in. You're never going to find the perfect one,
right?
But join one where your gifts, talents, and abilities are used in a way that furthers that mission. I think that's important.
Yeah, community and just connecting and walking into it. It's amazing stuff. So this is just a curious question. How does one start a biker group? Like, what is that? Like, it's a whole foreign world to me. Like, you're like, hey, I'm just going to get a group of guys. We're going to just ride around, or...
Yeah, that is so there is wrong ways to do it, and they will let you know. It is not going.
Is it like you're trying to draft from other groups too? Is there some of that going on, or...
That's a quick way to get stabbed. Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. The biggest question that other motorcycle clubs have is, why do you want to start something new when all of these other ones exist? And so I would really recommend anybody that's like, that might be my calling, is go join a secular motorcycle club and bring Jesus to the dark places. Don't try to bring them to you.
Yeah.
So that takes time, right? There's basically what happens in the motorcycle world is you start seeing a group that you like. You are who you surround yourself with. So you start going, hey, these are guys that I want to be around. I enjoy them. You can then officially become a hang around. Hang around can be anywhere from a couple months to a couple years. And it's just like, hey, we're getting to know each other and figuring this out. From there, you may or may not be invited to be a prospect. And prospect can take anywhere from 1 to 3 years or longer, depending on that. And then from prospect, if you make it through their process, then you become a probationary member. And then after that, you're a full member. And then different clubs have different ways to do it. So it's a very long process. And I would recommend don't start one. If you're in a place where our niche was, we had all of these guys who were Christian guys who didn't fit in normal Christian circles. And we found that most of the Christian clubs in that time were really focused on, like, they would do things like, hey, we can't drink if we're in our cuts. I can drink outside of my cut. And what they were kind of promoting, and no disrespect to them, but they were promoting this like, I'm two different people.
Yeah.
I'm one person in my motorcycle cut, I'm one person out of it. And so we just said, when they asked us, why are you doing this differently? We said, hey, we want to be people who are the same all through, and no one else is doing that. And they were like, okay. And then what we did is we refused to put patches on. Well, a lot of people come in, I'm going to wear my patches. And there's a thing called COC, or Confederation of Clubs, where they have to approve you, or not approve you, but you want to let them know you're coming in and make sure your colors don't conflict with anybody else's colors. And so we just refused to put patches on. We just rode everywhere. And at some point, we were like 15 guys. And finally, the local clubs pulled us aside and they said, no more. We don't know who you are. We don't know if you're a cop club. We don't know what's up. So you will put patches on. And we're like, no, we're good. They're like, no. You guys did this right. We appreciate it. But now we need to identify you. So go put this stuff on. And so we did. We put our patches on and held bike nights and did a bunch of stuff. And that was fun. But it took us 3 or 4 years from just hanging out as a couple friends to being in a place where it officially was respected and started.
And how much traveling have you done? Like, you just go across country, you go locally? What's the scope of this?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't go really far. I mean, we would go to some of the big biker rallies for fun, but some of those get so packed that they're not super enjoyable. So we rode constantly. I mean, every day, still ride every day. We rode once a week. We had a bigger 400 or 500 mile trip on a Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, something like that. And then we had once a quarter, we have a longer trip. So we rode a lot.
Amazing.
We rode out one day. I had one of my congregation members got stationed in Yuma, Arizona, and he was saying, hey, I'm lonely. So I took my club out. We rode all the way to Yuma, had lunch with him, and rode home just to do it. So
that's awesome. And then what brought you to like Story City and being more of a stationary pastor?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was stationary in Oceanside in San Diego. I pastored a revitalization church there. I was in the church about 10 years, 7.5 as the lead pastor. And I would have been happy staying in that place for the rest of my life. It was a great church, a fun church, took a lot of work. But close to 2 years before we left there, my wife and I were praying and just felt like God said, I'm preparing you to leave. And we were like, no, we really don't want to. And then he said, I'm going to send you to LA. And I've made this joke to you outside of this, but growing up in Northern California and then living in San Diego, the one thing they make you promise is, do you swear to hate Los Angeles for the rest of your life? So my wife and I were not looking forward to coming to LA. And we started making prayer trips up here, just like, Lord, where do you want us to be? What does this look like? And we were stuck in traffic in the middle of not a rush hour time, a total LA thing, right?
Yeah.
Like some off time in front of Dodger Stadium, trying to get up to 5 there. And instead of being angry at being stuck in traffic, my wife and I both just broke down in tears, started crying for the people around us. And, just realized how many of the 35 million people in California that don't know Jesus were here in LA, and how many cultures are here in LA. Yeah. And I was like, oh no, we're in trouble. If our heart just broke for LA, we're stuck. And so that was it. So we agreed to come up and take a job that was not Story City. That job fell through, and I got offered another job. I took that job, and it worked out where God knew exactly what he was doing. It ended up being a placeholder. I had it a year to the day, and then Story City asked me to come take the pastorate here, and so I did.
Amazing. So you've been here for a couple years now, 3 years?
Yeah, about 3 years.
And what is your thoughts on doing ministry in LA? Because I feel like it's been 1 year since I left New York, and talk about people not from New York when you hear from you're from New York. Yeah. And it's like a different country for me.
Yeah.
What do you think are the needs of the LA church? What do you think is some of the things that ministers need to be focusing on?
Yeah. I'd say before we get to what you can focus on, there's some things I think we have to establish as kind of known quantities here in LA. Yeah. The first is that loneliness and isolation, which is an issue across the world, obviously, but is really front and center in everything that happens in Los Angeles. So think about this. This guy comes from, somewhere in Idaho.
Yeah.
He's been in theater classes his whole life. He's great. Comes out here, he starts applying for jobs, doesn't know anybody, right? So he gets a casting call. But the casting call is designed so that everybody that looks a certain way is there. And so he gets there, he might, see the same person 3 or 4 different casting calls, might start to make friends, but ultimately that person is competing against everybody else in the room.
Right.
So even though you might start making friends, you're really in a place where you're making friends with people that you're kind of at like, one of us is going to make it here in LA and one isn't. So even in that friendship, there's sort of this set up to fail, set up to be lost. We know that churches here experience something like 33% a year turnover. I was talking to some of the guys at a church in Hollywood. They're at 50%.
Wow.
And so you're constantly like, there is this sense of to grow. You don't just have to grow at, the average church percent of what is it, 8 to 10% to kind of be healthy. You have to grow at the percentage bigger than your losses. So you're talking, if you lose 33% a year to grow, you have to grow more than 33% a year to cover that sort of loss. That's a very, it can be disheartening for pastors who aren't aware of that. The second thing is, with all of the nations here, with a different mindset, there are so many people I've met that, again, have never met a Christian in their life, just never met them. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that they have a caricature of Jesus and a caricature of Christians in their mind. And so a lot of what we have to do is we have to start from a different place. We have to start from a place of just earning the right to speak, because there isn't, 70 years ago, if you said I'm a police officer, there was weight, authority, but respect that went with that. Like, oh, you're probably a good person. Same with a pastor, same with a Christian. It's not the same. And so, people are starting with this caricature in their mind. Any interaction, they're starting like at a -50 of who you are without even knowing you.
Right.
And a really good interaction, doesn't make it net zero. It makes it probably -40 or -20.
Right.
And so we have to get into this mindset as pastors here that not just us, but the churches we lead are a reflection of those experiences of people. And so we have to constantly earn the right to speak before we have a right to actually do anything or convince anybody. Over and over again, I've heard people, even here, say, we watched you for 1.5 years before we really believed you were who you said you were, because we've seen too much fake stuff.
Yeah. Amazing. Final question. What would you say to the church general in America, outside of the LA? What do you feel like pressed on your heart to just share a message? Like if you were writing an email to the Church of America, what would be the subject matter?
Yeah. The way I might soundbite it would be, we're called to obedience, not success. And I think we have to be willing to let go of our own expectations for ourselves and our church and get back to loving Jesus for who he is, not for what he gives us. And I think that we need to stop focusing on trying to change people and change ourselves. That's not the church's job. That's the Holy Spirit's job. Our job is to model Jesus in a way that the overflow of that relationship is so obvious it's ministry, that any ministry that we do comes out of that overflow in a way that people can't help but see the power, the grace, the mercy of Jesus, not because we're trying to get them somewhere or get something from them, but because it's so obvious that Jesus is present with us, that people want that too. I think that's really what you see in the early church in Acts 2. So I would implore us, like, we're not, no rebuke against the church, like so many faithful people pastoring small churches where they never get recognition. God's with you. He remembers you. He's for you. The size of your congregation does not equate to the size of your impact in the kingdom. We've got to let go of some of those things. It's, it's so hard as pastors we compare all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think if we can get to a place where we can simply be okay with who God has made us to be, simply be okay with what God has given us now, I think we'd find ourselves where God is willing to give us more if we were gracious for what we got.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for watching till the end of the Christ and Coffee podcast. Have a great week. Stay caffeinated, my friends, and we'll see you next week. God bless you.